wabarakatuh, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for introduction, Doctor. I think I would like to thank Inspan for inviting me. I think for the second time. I was with the JOS, what do you call it, Josh too. And it's great to come back here. In fact, this is my first time in this building. And I believe in front of me is mostly postgraduate students, right? Which mostly your background might be in mathematics or statistics, but I believe that mathematics apply to the whole way of life, in any aspect of life. So especially in oceanography. So I would like to share with you some of the work that I've been doing for the past few years, which I remember that last year I presented something quite technical, which I can sense that not many can appreciate the technicality of oceanography. But today I'll try to be a little live, and in fact showing some of the aspect of statistics, which is very important in ocean. So then I hope that all of you can appreciate the aspect that I'm presenting. A few months ago, I was invited by a student in Persatuan Pelajar Matematik to present on ocean and mathematics, which is, I didn't realize that when I heard about ocean and mathematics, I was thinking that what I'm going to present about ocean and mathematics, because I'm doing ocean. So what does it relate to mathematics? And then I realized when I prepared the presentation, I realized that the whole things that I've been doing so far, everything relates to mathematics. So then I really appreciate even more when I was invited for this session. Recently, there is a phenomenon called tidal floods. Happens in the west coast of Malaysia. I believe that most of you heard about it. It was quite surprising because it never happened that bad before. This is some of the photograph from I think in Pelabuhan Kelang, and there's somewhere in Perak, also in Kuala Kedah. No, it's tidal flood. And that's what people are thinking. When this happens in the afternoon, lots of people who stays in the coastal region, in the west coast, they thought it's a tsunami. But in fact, it's part of the tidal floods. When this happens, it was a spring tides, which is spring tides mean you have the highest water level in the tidal cycle for every month. But in this case, in 1 year, you have 2 times where you have the highest water level, which is during the transition, the evolution of Moon and Earth, where it's very close to each other. But I'm not going to talk about this. What I'm trying to show you is, somehow I just met one of the staff here, Mohamed, which soon will be a doctor, right? So I believe that he been doing lots of work on tide gauge analysis, statistical analysis to study the water level of sea level of South China Sea. And all of these names of places, it's not only places, but this is where you get your tide gauge recorded. I think the oldest tide gauge recorded back to, I think maybe 50 years ago. Yes, 50 years ago. So it's a huge data set. So this tide gauge, some of it records every 27 seconds, some of it 51 seconds. So you just imagine you have almost thousands of data sets in 1 day, and you have 50 years of data sets, but yet we don't really understand what's happening in our oceans. So that's just to show you how important is statistics in environmental research, especially in sense of oceanography. All right. I'm doing oceanography as my research field. Why ocean is important? It's simple. Malaysia is a marine nation. and some would call it as a maritime nations. Why? Because you look at this green area, you understand that that is Malaysia. Of course, this is only part of it. But look at the red area in the oceans. So if you calculate the area in meter square or kilometer square, that area in the ocean is 2 times more than what we have on land. So that's how important marine is to our life in Malaysia. So that is why we understand very little about our oceans, right? So we understand more on land, but we have very limited understanding of our own marine area. So again, mathematics or statistics play a huge role in understanding the oceans. So because everything that whenever you try to understand the ocean in perspective of oceanography, survey, everything relates to mathematics. I'm not talking about corals or fish. Of course, there's mathematics behind it, but I'm not saying about looking at the species, how important they are to the ecosystem, but more towards what's the processes happens in the oceans, what's the dynamics. So all of this involves data sets. And nowadays, when you talk about ocean, you need data. And these data coming from lots of different equipments, different facilities that we have in the oceans. So this is some of the work that we've been doing in UMT. I think if you're interested in marine research, oceanography, UMT is the best place for us to really do a collaboration, because we collect the data, analyze the data, and of course some of the analysis require high level statistical analysis, which very much part of what you've been doing here. So we have normal data sets that we collected from our ship, RV Discovery. So it goes sometimes twice a year for a long cruise, which is sometimes 2 weeks or more. And then we have we also do lots of data statistical analysis from satellite data sets, especially the sea surface temperature, chlorophyll data sets, sea surface height, and many more. And we have our own receiving station in UMT, which we have real-time data transmitting to our system. We also deploy buoy. We have all these sensors in the middle of the chain, so where it collects data sets every now and then continuously. One of our oldest station so far have been, I think, for collecting data for 5 or 6 years. And in fact, we are the only institution in Malaysia that doing ocean data collection continuously. And now we also involve new technology, AUV, autonomous unmanned vehicles. In this case, we use Wave Glider. We work with one of the company in Shah Alam who brings this technology from California. It's still early technology, but now I think for the past few years it's being used throughout the world quite extensively, which is very interesting. I mean, this is a very interesting aspect. In fact, I'm having one mathematics student, sorry, not mathematics, IT students, just to work on database system for the Wave Glider, because it's very different from buoy and ship. So Wave Glider is like integration of both buoy and ships, because it's there in the ocean for, let's say, 1 month, and it keep moving and keep collecting data. So what happened with ships? You collect data only for a few weeks. What happened with buoy? You have only 1 point, but you're collecting the whole time scale. So glider is hybrid between those two. So it just fill in the gaps of data sets that we have in the ocean. So that's what we've been doing in UMT in terms of data collections. All right, I have lots of course, a lot of oceanography friends, and everybody keep saying that it's so hard to get data, so hard to get data. And of course, data sets in ocean involve millions of ringgits, because it's just a very tedious job. Hiring a ship for 1 week costs you more than 100K. So that's why it's so hard for us to do research with just FRGS project. So we need to have big grants and things like that. So, but the thing is, actually there is what we call as WOD, or what we call as World Ocean Data Sets, World Ocean Database, where they they compiled the whole data sets from 1910s to recent times. So, for example, one of my students doing some statistic analysis on data distribution in South China Sea. So if you can see, this is the station where you have data. Of course, it comes from sometimes some of it from the 1950s, 1960s up to 2000. So the data set that we have here is almost, I think, more than 20,000. We call it data cast, which is you deploy some equipment and get the data. Now, some of the data have temperature data, some of it have the whole set of temperature, salinity, oxygen. Some of it only maybe have sea surface temperature. So all mix of data sets, but at least we have 20,000 sets of data to work on. And of course, it requires certain skills of statistics to work on these data sets. Some of the images I share here is the whole data sets that being collected for the past 100 years in South China Sea. So you realize that we're working only on this part, but South China Sea is actually huge. So it involves, some part of Vietnam, China, Taiwan, Philippines. So this data is more than 100,000 data sets. So if you look at the statistics, one interesting point is data sets from monsoon is very low. So we don't really actually understand much about our ocean during monsoon season. So that's why we need to have ocean buoy, because ocean buoy will stay there, and that's why we have new technology like wave glider. So wave glider can work on its own while we operating them in our office. Just direct them to go wherever you want, as long as it's not being catched by Vietnamese fishermen. Because we had experienced loss of wave glider because the fishermen stole it and put it on the deck. But we have the GPS signal. We detect and we point the APMM, our agency Penguasa Maritim. So they go and fetch 50 kilometers away in the middle of the ocean, and bring back the whole ship vessel with them. All right. So, and from all the data sets, we talk lots about climate change. I believe that some of you might work on some aspect of climate change, because it's really, as a scientist, I believe that it's really happening. And in fact, from the data sets that we have, 50 years or 60 years data sets showing that the increase of at least 0.5 degree Celsius in average data for the South China Sea. If you understand climate change, 0.5 degrees is actually a very significant increase. All right, I will show you two things. One is upwelling, how we use statistic analysis to understand upwelling system. And then the second one, I will go on a bit of effect of El Nino on the aspect of South China Sea. Have you heard about upwelling before? So for normal marine science students, upwelling is some features that they usually heard, but they never experience it, or they never really understand it in perspective of Malaysia region. Because this feature, what happened with this feature is you cannot observe with your eyes, and you cannot measure with your directly. You need to have some series of measurement to really look at the presence of upwelling. So what happened with upwelling? Upwelling is a process in the oceans where you have subsurface water being pushed up to the surface. So subsurface water is usually high in terms of productivity, high in terms of nutrients, high in terms of oxygen. So much fresh water. So when they go up, they fill up the surface. So this is where fish will accumulate. Makan ikan. So that's why the process of moving that water from the bottom to the surface is what we call upwelling. It happens naturally because of we call coastal wind. So what happens is we have Coriolis force or Coriolis effect. When you have one wind moving in one direction, so if you're in the northern hemisphere, the Coriolis effect will push any floating object like waters to the right. And then in the southern hemisphere, it will move to the left. So in our area, when you have coastal winds moving from south to north, take into account the Coriolis force, the average water will move to the right. So what happens when the water moves to the right? So it provides a void area. So this void area allow water from subsurface to fill in that area, to maintain the equilibrium. Okay, so that is what we call upwelling. To simply explain upwelling is basically an area with high productivity waters coming from subsurface. Okay, so that's what we've been doing in UMP. And in Malaysia, in fact, we are the first group that upwelling is one of the most important feature in the ocean, in the world, because almost 90% of your fisheries food resources coming from upwelling area. Alright. So in Malaysia, there's no report or there's no studies on upwelling before. So we are in fact the first group that managed to provide prove that the upwelling presence in Southern South China Sea, especially in Malaysia waters, and by proving that, we give some very important information for the fisheries industries, for the government at least to manage the resources, because now we understand that we have an area with very high fisheries products, so we need to manage it in much better way. And of course, on the other hand, we try to understand it from the scientific perspective. We want to understand how the dynamics can provide more productive waters, what types of climate, El Nino, La Nina, Indian Ocean Dipole can affect the intensity of the upwelling. So all of this involves statistic analysis. So there's two places where you have upwelling in Malaysia. One is the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia. So we prove it in one of our publication in 2012. And we have one publication not from us but from China, who did some satellite imagery works and proved that offshore of Sabah also provide upwelling during northeast monsoon, which is during monsoon season. So upwelling over here can be observed during southwest monsoon, which is during July, August and September. Okay? So this is some of our figure diagram that we managed to plot during our cruise. So when you look at this is a salinity diagram, cross-section. So just imagine that I get a ship and then do a cross-section over here. So we have, let's say, 10 stations, and then we plot the contour. So this is basically the cake that you cut through that area, so you can see the layer. So what happens is, when you see this kind of halocline lifting, the lifting of halocline layer or salinity layers, so it is an indicator of there is something that is pushing this water up. But in this case, it doesn't reach the surface. In most cases of upwelling, this water will move to the surface. But during this season, it's still at an early stage of upwelling. But if we look at the satellite imagery from June to September, you can see the presence of upwelling is there by looking at the cool water over here. So you just imagine that the surrounding is warm, and then suddenly you have a cool water in the middle. So there's nowhere that cool water can happen over there unless it's coming from the subsurface. So then you look at the intensity is increasing during July, August and September. So that is why I'm going to show you this. That is why in this season you have a very high fish landings. So these data sets we get from the Jabatan Lembaga Kemajuan Ikan. So where they have all the fish landing database data. So they provide you with information when you have more fish, when you have less fish, So obviously, fish is more during August, September, and October, because that is the season where you have fish. And one interesting aspect that I realized is whenever we do a sea survey in offshore of Terengganu, you will definitely find Vietnamese vessels and Thai vessels, fisheries vessels, which is wooden vessel, operating offshore of Terengganu. So what happened is, I show you just this thermal fronts. So this is thermal fronts. So during the southwest monsoon, there is a patch of warm water inside the Gulf of Thailand over here. So you can see the trend. And in fact, the cooler water from upwelling is moving from here to up to Vietnam. Okay, so you can see this. It's continuous, and this area is very warm in Gulf of Thailand. And Gulf of Thailand, if you look at the South China Sea depleted fisheries, so the red one is depleted or overfished, the orange one is fully fished, and the green one is moderately or underfished. So we have an area is still quite okay for fisheries. But you know, in Gulf of Thailand, there's you know, you can say in a sense that there's no fish anymore. Of course, there's some fish, but not for fisheries industry, so it's not good. So that's why there's a lot of Thai fishermen is always operating in Malaysian waters, and in fact, they are operating even during the northeast monsoon, because we have our own island in Bidong, and that island is sheltered during monsoon. And of course, during monsoon, kapal orang Malaysia tak keluar dah. Ada cuti. Bulan 11 tu tutup kedai lah. But the Thais and Vietnamese is still doing their work. So they will go into our island just to, you know, to get some shelter during the monsoon season. So that is one of the issues that we discussing with the fisheries, the department, and so on. So, you know, by understanding the system, the dynamics, you can understand the social impact or the economic impact that happens in the region as well. Alright, and then of course now we're talking about El Nino and La Nina is coming. So for you that don't really understand what is El Nino is an atmospheric phenomena that happens to create a very warm area of Pacific Oceans. So when the Pacific Ocean is warmer than normal, so it provides a significant change to the climate of almost impact the whole world. But of course, the main region that affected by El Nino is the region that affected by the Pacific, surrounded by Pacific Oceans, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia. So what happened is, people might understand what happens to atmosphere. You know, you get hot weather, warm weather during El Nino, and then you have cool weather, rainy season during La Nina. But the same thing doesn't really match well with what happened in the oceans, especially in the South China Sea. So what you're looking at now is El Nino, Ocean El Nino Index, which show you the peak during the El Nino 2006-2007, the peak during El Nino 2009 and 10, and you can see a very strong El Nino during 2015 and 16, which happens now. So in terms of this is what we have been doing, the detail of the upwelling. So we want to understand what is the effect on upwelling, because when it affects upwelling, it affects the fisheries. So I mean, you will keep hearing complaints from the fishermen saying that there's no fish. You know, this season it's so hard to get money because there's no fish. All involve socio-economic aspect, and I believe some of you guys also doing works on statistics in socio-economics, right? So I mean, that's how environment is very much blended with mathematics and also with the humans. In this case, if you look at, we plot almost 8 years of data sets, an average of August, which is the peak of upwelling seasons. You can see it's so different during 2010, because 2010 is quite strong. The El Nino happens during 2010, and I don't have the 2016, but in fact, the 2016 also showed a similar warm water at the sea surface temperature. So, I mean, this at least shows that the upwelling is depleted during the El Nino season. So, fisheries income will be lower, because of the El Nino. And of course, during other seasons, it looks normal. Especially, look at this 2006. This is La Nina. La Nina provide you with, in fact, intensify of upwelling. So 2006. So I mean, in terms of scientific perspective, we're really looking forward to the 2017 because we really want to know what's going to happen to the data for La Nina season. And we did also some wavelet transformation analysis, which is a signal processing tools that we use to understand the effect of sea surface temperature and how El Nino really, the signal of El Nino really appear within that sea surface temperature from the satellite images. So, so you can see it's quite clear during the 97 and 98, which is one of the hardest hit El Nino, and also 2010. So you can see the peak. So what we did was we tried to when you do signal processing, you want to remove all this noise and frequency that is not related to frequency required for El Nino appearance. So that's basically what the analysis is meant to show. And then even clearer during non-El Nino year and El Nino year, you can see this is from the 50 years data sets. We try to average out the 50 years data sets. You can see the El Nino is affecting the sea surface temperature. You get warmer area in the El Nino year rather than a very cool area during non-El Nino year. This is data sets during northeast monsoon, which is December, January, and February. The area where you have the season where you have lots of cool water coming from the north. All right, I think that's about it. What I'm going to present, and just to tell you how important is ocean data sets. I've been involving in what we call as National Scientific Cruise Expedition for 2016, and in fact we've done our first phase of cruise. So we've done this in 2 weeks' time, I think in August. So we're going to Sabah supposedly this Saturday for another 2 weeks, and another 2 weeks for Sarawak area to do field measurement. So hopefully to get some hands-on information on El Nino effect on the ocean. And just for your information, it involved almost 20 agencies throughout Malaysia. I think UPM also is in there. 70 scientists from many institutions, including agencies from government. Mostly provided 1 million ringgit for the whole research and cruise. And of course, in-kind contribution by Navy and UMT ships and also Jabatan Laut ships. So it covers more than 100 stations throughout the entire South China Sea region. So that's the pelancaran ceremony in Pelabuhan Klang. So that's the ship that we will be using. So yeah, I hope that I managed to give you some of the interesting information on the oceanography survey in the South China Sea. So thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Is there any questions that you would like to ask Vincent?
Yes.
So what about the UNESCO? Is there any upgrading occurrence in
As far as we're concerned, no. Because the unique things about upwelling, actually we can predict by understanding the trend of wind. So what happened in southern South China Sea, during southern monsoon, the wind is moving this direction. So from south to north. So I mean, by simple calculation, we can sort of say that probably there is upwelling there. But in the west coast, there's no similar pattern for that kind of. But I think up to the north in Andaman, they probably have a certain area of upwelling as well. But I'm not sure. But for the South China Sea, so this is the area the different thing is in the open ocean, in like Pacific or Indian Ocean or Atlantic Ocean, the upwelling happens throughout the year. In most areas, I mean the large upwelling system. But small upwelling system usually happens in a very short time scale. Even in fact, some places in a very small scale happens only for a few weeks. But it's good enough to provide productivity for that area. Yes, but the thing about upwelling is many people thought that they can predict by looking at the sea surface temperature or chlorophyll. But and in fact, some agency remote sensing work with perikanan. They try to do that kind of prediction, but it doesn't really work because you can predict sea surface temperature, but not necessarily cool sea surface temperature will provide high productivity. And in fact, high chlorophyll also doesn't really say that productivity is high. The only way you need to understand it is by looking at the nutrients. So that's what we've been doing. We have some data sets that show that, but part of this EPSK is actually looking in more details of the nutrients, how it relates to the upwellings and how the dynamics really produce an area with high productivity upwellings in the area. So it happens throughout the southwest monsoon, which is from June to September. Yeah, it's a continuous process, but the intensity fluctuates. The intensity depends on the wind. Sometimes if you have stronger wind, you can have upwelling happens. You can see even on the surface. In certain cases, you only see at the subsurface. So the wind play a major role. But of course, during the whole season, from our analysis of I think more than 15 years data sets of satellite imagery, you can see it's there for at least 3 months. Of course, the difference. I mean, when we first presented with this result to most researchers in oceanography, not many really believe that upwelling really happens because they thought that this is a shallow area. What happens is in Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, so usually it happens at area below 200 meters and then it brings up even fresh water. But I mean that's wrong. It did happen in shallow area, and in fact there's many literature saying that it happens in like Adriatic Sea. There's a few seas that have a similar bathymetry like South China Sea. So it happens, but of course the intensity is slightly lower because tropical water is almost warm compared to the Minatitis regions or subtropical waters. So the intensity of productivity might be lower than what we had in the big oceans. But still, we managed to prove from, I mean, in fact, from mathematical calculation, we proved that even shallow water, 50 meter can really produce upwelling. Okay, it's basically upwelling index depends on wind stress. So that is the main component for the equation. It's quite a simple equation. So I mean, upwelling index is one of the equations that generally used in upwelling studies. But the main component is to have the wind data at the coastal area. So the accuracy of the index will be depend on how accurate is your data at the coastal area. Because sometimes people get data not on the coastal area but in much inland area, which is quite inaccurate. It depends on the geography of the area. It's universal. It's universal. And of course, it depends on the latitude as well. Okay.
The data collected by EMT, is it publicly available?
Okay. Like I said earlier, the data costs you a lot. So it is only available if you collaborate with us. We have our own data sets, database. and it's there. But of course, most, I mean, like what we've been doing with in SPAM is we agree on collaboration. So then we share some of the data sets. The data sharing is mostly based on collaboration basis. But for EPSK, so it's openly available. So that's the unique part, because the National Oceanographic Directorate, they develop a data center for Malaysia oceanography. So the whole data sets for this particular cruise will be available once it's ready. It will be available openly to any user. But for UMT, of course, it's on individual basis. So mostly on collaboration work. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fatzil, for a very interesting talk. I'd like to invite Dr. Bakri to the stage, right, to hand over. He's the head of laboratory for statistical services, to hand over a token of gift to Dr. Fatzil.